Have you ever heard of a play from the 5th century that feels just like a modern blockbuster? I'm talking packed with romance, political drama, and characters you just can't forget. Well, today we're diving deep into exactly that, the Sanskrit classic Mrichhakatikam. And we're going to do it by asking some simple questions to figure out what makes this ancient story feel so incredibly fresh.
And just a quick heads up on our source material. Everything we're about to get into is based on the amazing study materials put together by the Department of Sanskrit at Odisha State Open University. So you know we're in good hands. Let's get started.
So let's kick things off with the big one. What in the world is the Mṛcchakatikam? And maybe more importantly, what can a play this old, we're talking the 5th century, really teach us about how we tell stories today?
To really get to the bottom of that, here's our game plan. We're going to take a little journey through the play. We'll start by figuring out what kind of play it is, then we'll meet its fantastic characters, uncover the secret structure that makes the whole thing work, and finally, get to know the genius who wrote it all, the great Śūdraka.
Okay, so first things first. Before we get into all the romance and intrigue, what kind of play are we actually dealing with here? Where does this piece fit in the grand tradition of Sanskrit drama?
Well, you see, in the classical Sanskrit tradition, drama wasn't just drama. It was way more specific. There are actually 10 major types, which are known as rupaka. You can think of them as 10 basic genres that every playwright was working with.
And Mṛcchakatikam falls into a really interesting category called a prakarana. Now, this type of play has a pretty specific formula. First, the plot has to be original, something the poet invented, not a story from mythology. The hero has to be a Brahmin, a minister, or a merchant. And here's the kicker. The story has to involve two different heroines, a noble wife and a courtesan.
So what about that name, Mrichhakatikam? It sounds pretty grand, right? But it literally just translates to the little clay cart. And that name points to a small, seemingly insignificant object in the story that ends up connecting everyone's lives. It's such a humble, totally human title for a play. All right, so we've got the genre down. But a play is nothing without its people. So who are the characters that drive this amazing story forward? Let's meet them.
Oh, this cast is just incredible. At the heart of it all is Śūdraka, our hero. He used to be rich, but now he's poor, but everyone still respects him because he's such a good guy. Then you have Vasantasena, a rich, powerful courtesan who falls in love with him for his character, not his money. The villain, Shakara, is the king's brother-in-law, and he's just this perfect mix of cruel and idiotic. And surrounding them, you've got Charudata's loyal wife, Duta, the hilarious comic relief Maitreya, and even a thief with a heart of gold named Sharvalak. It's like a snapshot of an entire city.
And this is where it gets so fascinating. The fact that we have two heroines. Duta is the Kulajanaika, the noble-born wife. She represents all the virtues of home and family. But then you have Vasantasena, the Vaishanaika, the courtesan, who represents passion, art, and love out in the public world. And the play doesn't judge either of them. It just shows these two powerful, valid forms of womanhood.
And the story itself is so much bigger than you think. This is not just some simple romance. There are two huge plot lines woven together perfectly. You've got the beautiful love story between Charudata and Vasantasena, and at the exact same time, there's a political thriller about a revolution to take down a corrupt king.
So, you might be wondering, how in the world do you structure a story with so many moving parts? Well, believe it or not, ancient playwrights had a system for that. Let's take a look at the formal building blocks of the drama.
You see, the ancient Indian guide to theater, the Natya Shastra, lays out this incredible blueprint. It says that every great story is built on 5 core elements, or you could call them causes of action. In Sanskrit, they're called the artha prakritis. These are basically the essential nuts and bolts of the whole narrative.
And here's how it works. Everything begins with the bija, which means the seed of the story. That seed gets watered and helped along by the bindu, or the drop. Then you have the pitaka, that's the major subplot, like our political revolution. You also have the prakari, which is a smaller, self-contained episode, and it all builds and builds towards the karya, the final goal or purpose of the play. Let's just zoom in on that first element, the bija, the seed, because this is just brilliant storytelling. In Mṛcchakatikam, it's a single, simple line spoken by the villain in the very first act. He just mentions that Vasantasena is in love with the poor Charudata. It feels like a throwaway comment, right? But that tiny seed is what the entire sprawling tree of the plot grows from. It's just masterful design. So,
Who was the incredible mind behind this complex structure and these unforgettable characters? We've got to talk about the poet Śūdraka.
Now, a lot about him is a mystery, but what we do know is absolutely fascinating. The play itself tells us he was a king and a warrior, but he was also a true polymath, a scholar of the Vedas, of mathematics, of the arts, and this is so important, he was a master of both the fancy, high-art Sanskrit and the common languages that everyday people actually spoke.
And that is exactly why his play feels so alive, even today. That skill with language wasn't just him showing off. It's what allowed him to write dialogue that felt totally real for every single character. The Brahmin speaks differently than the thief, who speaks differently than the courtesan. It creates this rich, believable world that just jumps off the page.
When it comes right down to it, Mṛcchakatikam isn't just one thing. It's a romance, it's a comedy, it's a political thriller, and it's a sharp commentary on social justice, all wrapped up in this incredibly sophisticated structure. It's a masterpiece that works on literally every single level.
And that brings us to one last thought to leave you with. We tend to think of complex story structure as some modern invention. But here, we have a blueprint from the 5th century that juggles character, subplot, and theme like an absolute pro. It really makes you wonder, what can these ancient ideas, like the seed and the purpose, teach the screenwriters and novelists and storytellers of today? It's just proof that a great story, a truly great story, is absolutely timeless.